Okay, so look, I really don't know how we're going to talk about this or anything, but I guess I have like maybe a
Well, why don't
question,
you
and then you can.
intro what you've been reading? Because I brought
Okay,
to prepare for this 3 different Bibles, including
wow.
a KJV, a Masonic Bible, and a Catholic Bible.
Whoa,
So
whoa, whoa.
Masonic
Okay,
Bible? What's in
yeah,
that?
okay. Maybe
I don't
that's good.
know.
That's so.
Voltaire?
That's it. Wait. These are all great questions. So some listeners know. I don't know. This year, I've done something that. Well, I'm not done with it, but I did something that I promised myself I'd do at some point in my life, which is to read the King James version, the KJV version of the Bible, from beginning to end. But I didn't read it from beginning to end. I read it New Testament from beginning to end, and now I'm in the Old Testament. I was really trying to finish Leviticus on the plane, but I didn't because it's really heavy
That's
going.
that's rough.
It's really, really heavy going.
It's a
Um,
choice.
but it's a good question, I guess. You know, I didn't know until I started messing with this stuff how many various translations there are. I mean, I knew that the King James version was from what 1611, and it was King James wanted a new. I mean, there were already Church of England translations, but he wanted a new one, an updated one. And as far as I know, it's not like a from whole cloth, but it's an update of what was it like? Well, some Bible that existed, and since then I know that there's been a lot of changes, and that there are various translations, and I actually have downloaded several others to help myself when you get to some heavy going King James stuff. What's the Masonic Bible?
Um, so I don't really know. It is so I am at my fiance's house.
He's a
That's right.
Mason.
No, the crowd bullied
Oh,
me into getting engaged, but his brother is, and so I'm using
wow.
his Bibles, I guess. And I guess
Oh, so you didn't bring any. You picked them
no,
up off the shelf.
yeah,
You're at
well,
a house and you picked up some
yes,
Bibles. Yeah, okay. All right. I thought you're
um,
carrying Bibles around like a good faithful
like
person
a
ahead
good
Christmas.
Christian girl.
Yeah.
No, I guess I think it just has like Masonic stuff in it, but I didn't know there was a Masonic Bible. I don't
It
know what
could
it
be that it's
contains.
it's the just like the Bible shorn of the miracles, like the Jefferson Bible.
Wait, but what do
Oh,
we so I don't even know what the Masons believe. Do you guys know?
It
Like there's just
I'm
like
not
wasn't
a
it
allowed to
secret?
know
non
because I'm a woman.
mm. So rule 1, don't tell the women.
Yeah. That's also
Santi,
really funny.
yeah, go on.
I think it's a deistic thing. Like they believe in
Really? That's it? That's what the Masons are? Just deists?
it was like a reaction. I mean, yeah, it was I don't want to talk about the Masons.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Go on, Christine.
Santi is freaked out by them.
No,
Um, I was just gonna say it's interesting the number of like different male only religious kind of sects. So there's like the Masonic
aren't all
Lodge type
religions?
thing.
I mean,
Well,
aren't
no,
all
I
religions
mean,
mostly male only? And then, I mean, to get to the point of all these modern translations, you always had all the masculine pronouns and everything else. And one of the defining things about the new English translations of the Bible is most of them have gone gender inclusive. So they talk about persons rather than men and things like that, and brothers and sisters
I
instead
don't
of
read any Bible
brothers.
that talks about persons or uses particular pronouns for God.
I
No,
don't
I
know.
was actually
See,
just thinking
go
about
on.
like this is actually not related to the Bible. But I was talking about this with my parents. But there's like the Masonic Lodge type male society in sort of Western countries, and then both of my parents are Nigerian, Igbo, and actually around Christmas and like big holidays is when the masquerades come out in Nigeria in Igbo culture, and these are like these sort of like masked, costumed beings that are meant to be like the spirits of ancestors. And they like come out, they dance, they chase women around because women are not
Mm.
supposed to see them. But they're all male societies, and like men can get inducted into like a house of a certain masquerade, and then like perform that at holidays and ceremonies. But traditionally, yeah, women are not allowed to be part of this and are not even supposed to see the masquerades. And my mom was telling me this story about how when she was a little girl, when the masquerades would come through her village, like all the girls would stay inside. And if you were outside, a masquerade might chase you and beat you with the
Wow.
whip for looking at them,
Wow.
but
Wow.
only women. So anyway, Freemasons, I guess, don't beat any women these days. At
We
least
don't know that.
under the aegis of their religious tradition or non-religious tradition. But I'm interested in these sort of like male interpretations of faith groups, belief groups. And now Damir reading Leviticus on the plane, I guess, probably surrounded by other bros who are reading different books of the Bible.
Is that right? Is it a resurgence of bros reading the Bible? Is that a cultural thing now?
Well, there was an interesting piece by my friend Ruth Graham in the New York Times a few weeks ago, and maybe we can find a link and put it in the chat, about how churches are seeing a resurgence in young male attendees, which is actually pretty countercultural because women are traditionally like more religious or more likely to go to church. But evangelical churches and Catholic churches, especially the more trad and Orthodox ones, and Santi, maybe you can speak to this too, are seeing a resurgence in like young men coming.
Yeah, I just saw an article that said that Silicon Valley is also seeing a resurgence in like evangelical Christianity.
Evangelical Christianity.
Yeah, well, or like non-denominational.
That's alarming, but maybe great. You know what? The Lord works in mysterious ways.
Yeah,
maybe
why is it
AI
alarming?
really...
Yeah, why is
Hold
it
on,
alarming?
why is it
Whoa.
alarming? Oh, hello.
We're a pluralistic podcast here. We believe in freedom of religion.
No, we do.
Not just that. Not just that. As a religious woman, shouldn't you welcome more faith people? Why are you keeping the Silicon Valley bros from your faith? I thought
Would
your
you rather
faith
they just believe in money?
Well, actually, that was
Mammon, please.
Oh, Mammon, right?
Please. This is the KJV podcast.
Yeah.
No, I'm kind of skeptical of the sort of varieties of religion that emerge from Silicon Valley generally. Like the accelerationist sort of thing, the obsession with trying to live forever, like the longevity enthusiast people, which I think is a form of spirituality. Like I think that's a religious impulse, just channeled into
Definitely.
being a huge lame-o who doesn't drink at parties. Sorry to people who are sober on purpose. Brian Johnson is really annoying to me.
Brian Johnson is one of these longevity guys that
he's
controls everything
who drinks
he consumes.
Drinks his son's blood.
Who is getting transplants of his son's blood, who's
Really?
like always
Right.
monitoring his like...
Yeah.
It was he's super weird. And he doesn't look any younger. He now looks like a waxy corpse.
The impulse to want to survive death is a religious impulse.
It's a religious impulse.
And people are trying to see if there's a way that technology can deliver what only God could deliver.
And if they're getting into evangelicalism or getting into Christianity, that's great. I just wonder if they are going to get into Christianity or if it's going to turn into another weird thing.
So there is like Peter Thiel, say what you will about him, but he's a very smart guy, and he has published an essay on sort of his interpretation of Christianity called Against Edenism. Eden, like the Garden of Eden.
Eden, the place? Okay.
Yeah. And he says that like it's crazy. It's really smart, but it's kind of crazy. And it's basically technology is supposed to contribute to the salvation of mankind, and that salvation of like the history of humanity is not a return to the Garden of Eden, but to the New Jerusalem, a new city. And then he somehow weaves the story of Faust. You know, the
Goethe?
The Goethe, the story of who was Faust? Like a scientist that makes a deal with the devil or something.
Yeah.
And he sort of weaves that back into Christianity.
See, that's like
and says like
no addition,
basically a Faustian
please.
Christianity.
No addition,
guys. But here's the thing that as a whatever raised pagan, raised nothing, a nun.
Damir was raised under communism in Yugoslavia.
But he was baptized. He told me.
Yes, that's right.
That's going to kick in eventually.
The thing that's striking to me, I guess, is reading this stuff is, Croatia's Catholic. As you mentioned, I was, at the insistence of an uncle, baptized, and the only people that baptized me were Protestants here. So technically, I'm a Protestant, I guess. I don't know if that makes me a Protestant, but no, specifically, it's that though. It's you're saying about, how Silicon Valley is just like making Christianity its own and stuff like that. Both of you guys are Catholics, right?
I am, yeah.
And so the really interesting thing about reading through this stuff and then sort of considering America as it is that it really is just you and God and through the scripture and faith. There's none of this intermediary stuff that you guys go through. There are
like the institution of the church.
The institution of the church, and in fact,
also built up by the state in Europe.
No, for sure, but like I'm just getting to this point, which is that there is something about Protestantism that's very democratic in the sense that it disintermediates. It takes a lot of institutions away. It flattens. Now, of course, churches then come up in Protestantism that exist and create their own little hierarchies. But I think at the core of it, again, this is from deep ignorance, but from a little bit of understanding, and it's sort of dangerous, of course, is that that you are sort of, I guess, expected to go through the stuff yourself and not take any sort of extra guidance that, presumably, Christine, you would prefer to have more guidance for these Silicon Valley bros, because a little bit of democratic knowledge of the Bible is a dangerous thing, and what could they possibly do with it? But it is interesting. It's I mean, I sort of was gesturing at this in this past week's Tuesday note about how America, how a lot of America is just deformed Protestantism, and how Protestantism itself is, like I said, an attempt to just like hack at all of this stuff, and necessarily it leads to all sorts of innovations in faith that you Catholics would find abhorrent. So I mean, I don't know.
But there's a positive side to that. There's a positive side to it, and I think I think there's going to be in the long term, in the long run, there's an American contribution to the Catholic or the Orthodox churches, because the American emphasis on individual experience and judgment, I think, is good. And the fact that, to a certain extent, you as a person has to decide what to believe, the sort of Protestant conviction that spread in the United States because it was founded by Protestants, I think is good. There's a joke in Kierkegaard where this man is having a crisis of faith, and he tells his wife, "I don't know if I'm Christian anymore," and she says, "Of course you're Christian. You're Danish."
Right.
And you can't do that in America, right?
Yeah. Right. No, exactly. But Christine, talk to me about your worries about innovations, because that's what we're talking about here. And I've always understood the Catholic Church to be hidebound and anti-innovation in a lot of these things. That's why Vatican II, when all these innovations happen, and there's still most of the church is bad, and yet Protestantism is innovation and allows individuals to come up with whatever they more or less, however they can interpret, as long as they can get people to follow them. It's a denomination, right?
Yeah, well, so I guess some background maybe. A lot of the Protestant faith generally is based on this idea of sola scriptura, like the Bible alone, and it's this doctrine that suggests, or really it doesn't suggest, it states that the Bible is the sole infallible source of authority for practice, that the scripture, sola scriptura, scripture is all that you need, and also that scripture is clear and you should be able to understand it yourself. And as you mentioned, sort of struggling through Leviticus on the plane, it's not necessarily that clear. And the belief in sola scriptura, this sort of Protestant idea that you just read the Bible, interpret it for yourself, and assume that whatever you've come up with is the voice of God, and is what religion should be, can lead to a lot of different things depending on what you come up with as your interpretation of scripture. Well, I mean, again, I'm not God, actually.
It can be bad.
Shocking.
But you're saying that within the context of Silicon Valley, it could be especially bad.
Yeah, there are a lot of different interpretations of what one believes scripture is saying.
why should we trust, the Vatican, a bunch of a long big hierarchy, and like a bunch of, I don't know, deeply institutionalized and potentially quite corrupt.
That's a very nice description of the Vatican, by the way.
No, sure,
Yeah.
sure.
The nicest you could say.
But
They're
why
fashionable, they're corrupt.
but why should we trust them as opposed to, and sola scriptura, again, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys know this stuff way more than me, but that's actually not in the Bible. The part that's in the Bible that's contested is the question of works versus faith, right? It's the prods actually look at that stuff and conclude that like good works actually are an innovation of the Catholic Church, and there's no actual grounding for that. That's an institutional innovation, that like alms and helping the poor and things like that, while encouraged, that nowhere is it said that that'll save you. Salvation only comes to those that believe in what is taught by these apostles, and it's taught in this text that is, well, I do want to talk about that, because this gets us back to the different versions of the Bible, which is something I am kind of obsessed with, because what is the text and what is the word and all this stuff, because there isn't one. And but in any case, still, I just throw it back at you that like this idea of one core difference between Catholics and Protestants is that you can do good things, or you should be doing good things, and is that right? That'll help you in the Catholic Church, and it shouldn't in the Protestant Church unless you have some like innovative, branch of that. Maybe the high Anglicans are more into works than.
Yeah, but there's two sides to that, because that's the whole Weber, like Max Weber's thesis about Protestantism and capitalism, that precisely because it wasn't works that saved you, but because of unconditional election, there had to be some sort of exterior sign that you were elected, and so you worked really hard to prove that.
Calvinism.
Right. So
right, but he also it's usually second generation though, right? Like the first generation are sort of fine with it. It's the second generation that aren't like, that sort of are born into this world that then feel like they have to. But that's like a weird psychological thing and kind of unprovable, right?
We're all
just
American. We're all a second generation
lifestyle.
But again, I'm just getting at this question. Why are you putting faith in this one hidebound institution as opposed to the horse sense of a bunch of individuals, as we good Americans are supposed to do, right? The wisdom of crowds, one might say, versus the wisdom of a hidebound institution, hierarchical institution.
It is a wisdom of a crowd that's just been sort of tamed and trimmed by a hidebound institution.
Distilled over time, tradition, as it were.
There's a lot of exactly. Tradition is the democracy of the dead. It's just that the franchise is not as expansive as it is in Protestantism, maybe.
Why doesn't that bug you? Why do you guys like that an institution mediates this stuff for you, as opposed to
I don't love it, but it's not really, I don't see it like that. It's more like how do you understand first of all, it's not like a book, right? It's not like Christianity is a book that is interpreted. It's a church that existed before the book was there. The church, in fact, determined what the book was going to have.
Right.
So, the canon was set in the 4th century. It wasn't set in Jesus' lifetime. The earliest stuff is just letters, right? So first of all, there's just the historical point of that. Second of all, it's just like it's a logical point. Like, who determines the canon? Well, there's a body of people that determines the canon. So if you even accept the Bible as a legitimate text, you're already implicitly accepting the authority of the people that determine the canon, right? And then just as a matter of understanding a text, if you're reading Machiavelli, right, you are around a tradition of scholars that has been interpreting Machiavelli and tells you the context, tells you different things about it, and within that you weave your own interpretation of it. But there's a sort of
guided understanding, a general backdrop of Machiavelli.
Right.
But you're more or less free to come up with your own stuff, and you can get laughed out of things if you. I mean, a lot of foolish scholars recently have done have tried to do like feminist and positive interpretations of Machiavelli. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean,
Wait,
I feel
Damir,
it's
you
foolish.
don't think Machiavelli was a feminist?
Yeah, I don't.
No,
I'm
but
gonna laugh you out of this podcast.
there's a okay, but there is a more of an explicit authority on behalf of the church. It's true, but
Right,
the,
and
the thing is, like, I wouldn't.
Well, here,
I would be a lot more if the evidence was that the authority of the church was just stultifying creative people, then
Yeah.
I wouldn't be happy to be Catholic, because but it's been the opposite. You find extreme, even in the 20th century, even in the centuries when the church was in the minority in Europe in terms of power, has been a efflorescence of great creative thinkers. Some of them are too creative and they get in trouble
Yeah,
with
totally.
the
yeah,
Inquisition.
burn.
So
They put that shit on a
but
funeral
that
pyre,
tension
right?
even helps. Yeah.
I mean, I as a Catholic convert, so I converted in college. This was actually something that was really attractive to me, coming from a background of sort of non-denominational, quasi-Pentecostal evangelicalism, I guess. Is that I feel very comforted by the fact that there has been a tradition of, like, often very intelligent and well-informed people thinking about the questions put forward by scripture and by tradition over the course of years, and has, like, created this sort of accretion of understanding. And yet there's still, as Santi was saying, room for disagreement, room for different interpretations. But I mean, and maybe this is sort of an innate conservatism that I have, which everyone on this podcast loves to hint at anyway.
Finally,
but-
she admits it.
But I'm just like I'm a random person. I don't necessarily, I have never understood the American ideal that, like, well, I, in my authority as a random person, should just pick up the Bible and interpret it. Like, obviously, I know what this means. How? Why? Like, why would I believe
Well,
that to be the case?
So again, like,
And, like,
this
also
is-
and the
Go
other
on.
idea, and then this is just like a religious idea, right? Like, this depends on the question of faith. If one has faith that the church and tradition are animated in some way by God, and an understanding that comes from that, then that is also a comforting place to be. And I think that's a big part of it. And that's, I think, the part that's sort of hardest to understand, this sense of trust, basically, in something that you cannot necessarily prove. But that's also just like an inherent part of religion.
But so the part that's interesting, again, is that at least in the Protestant tradition, is this idea that you got the direct line upstairs, that it's not mediated through these institutions. So it feels like to me, when you guys are talking about respecting tradition and respecting the interpretation, is that and respecting the intellectuals that have done the work through the centuries, and that's Christianity, is that the Christianity is tradition rather than the line upstairs. Now, again, like, being raised as I have been, it's always made sense to me that, this is to do with institutions and the rest of it. But now reading the texts, and especially you read the Gospels, you're like, well, actually, there's this guy, and like some pretty supernatural stuff happened. Like, you believe in that? And if you do, then you've got a line upstairs directly, and all of this accretions and stuff, sure, like, the text is hard to interpret. It's a little this, that, and, like any text, you can have a bunch of arguments in it, but like, you're believing in that, not the institutions, not the tradition. You're believing in the direct line.
You're not believing in the text. This is not a wisdom religion.
No. I'm sorry, I didn't say that. I'm saying you're believing in the supernatural as opposed to an institution. And it's
more like you're believing in an event that happened historically, because every religion believes in the supernatural. So you're like, how do you interpret the event that happened?
I don't think that's right. Protestants believe in like the everyday supernatural much more so, I think, than you guys do.
But I think Catholics do too, and maybe this is my, like, sort of syncretic, like,
you're talking to an African and a South American, and you're telling them they don't believe in the.
Yeah, unfortunately, I believe in more supernatural things than most. But I mean, like, one of the things that I think is easy to overlook in Catholicism, and this is also a funny thing, speaking of Africans, from my mom, who when I converted was like, you know, you can still talk to God yourself, right? Like you don't have to use a priest. And I was like, I know. Like it's not one or the other, it's both. There is like this sort of this idea of tradition and the church, but like God is also just there. Like I don't like it's not like he's like locked in a box
So
in the
that's
church and I can
'cause-
only go visit him like when I'm like holding the Bible in a Catholic church, right? Like there's still a line upstairs and there's also like another like more decorative line like through the church. Maybe that's not
that's
the
interesting.
best way of describing it.
My wife grew up Protestant, and when she converted to Catholicism, her dad asked her, "Does that mean you don't want a personal relationship
Yeah,
with God?"
exactly.
And that is true. I mean, that is but it's not like we supplant singular like our personal consciousness for that of an institution of like a decrepit Renaissance monarchy in the middle of Europe. It's more like
I gave up my personal relationship with God for the frescoes. Sorry, go on, son.
no, exactly. No, it's like that's a good one. It's just it's Protestantism is like Cartesian in a way. It's singular consciousness, and then you find God. Whereas this is you're incorporated to the same group of people that met Jesus, and then met other people, and met other people, met other people until today. You're part of the same historical lineage of like sort of familial connections. And the one thing that unites those is like the sort of faith that is contained within a sort of teaching authority and the texts and a few other things. But within that, you know how crazy, I mean, you know, even within Catholicism today, you can see how different it is. Bavarian Catholicism from American Catholicism, from Latin American, from African. I mean, there's a lot of variety within it. And also, there's also been not crazy, but like singular individuals that have sprouted within the institution that
They're
pushed
all
against
crazy.
it, but also been pushed back, like St. John of the Cross or like Teresa of Avila. So the difference is this: you interpret things together as a group, or you interpret text by yourself. And most people interpret text in a group.
Sure, I guess even Protestants do, right? Like, I mean, they're supposed to be in congregations. You're not supposed to be just, you know, by yourself, I guess. Yeah, I mean, and that gets to the other part, which is super interesting to me, because this gets back to the King James stuff, because I guess some of the more hardcore Protestants in America insist that that is the one true thing, and all these innovations are bad juju. But it really gets into a really, well, it gets to the question of, you know, literalism
Well, that is
in
absurd.
the word. Well, I mean, but it's an interesting thing.
Of
right?
all the
Isn't it?
languages, this one language, and of all the translations in that language, this one translation, which admittedly is the best, or the most beautiful.
It's the nicest one. It's the most beautiful
Have you
one.
never
But
read the Message Bible?
I heard about the Message. Someone texted me about the Message.
Oh, man, in youth group, that one was killing it.
Yeah,
That's just
I
like
need
some
to read
guy
that.
just like paraphrased the entire Bible,
Yeah,
right?
and it's just like a vibey Bible. It's like, and Jesus said to his friends, "What's up?" It's
Boy.
really, it's not good.
The
That could
beauty
be-
the
that's
beauty
probably
of the
second
language.
best.
It's
No, but
disappeared.
you know, like even Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens have written about how they love the King James on the
Sure.
aesthetic level.
I mean, it's
that
a-
might
it's-
also just be them remembering when they were school kids.
No, but
and being
guys,
nostalgic,
I
but-
mean, I'll say this. It's just like reading it now. It's amazing to me. Like every couple of pages, I'm like, oh, that's from there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's it. I mean, it's just bizarre. It's like I've gone through my whole life, you know, with the stuff filtering by me and not even, you know, obviously picking up maybe some resonance, but not really like getting the full resonance of it. So now I feel like as I go through this, I'm just arming myself for future readings and just like a richness of metaphor that just like completely passed me by.
But
So
let's-
in
Yeah.
many
speaking
ways,
of
a huge
metaphor, though,
regret.
Damir,
The
this
original
is
classic text. Like I'm a classical schools person in that, honestly. I think anybody who wants to read books or read literature should have like at least a passing understanding of the Bible, because just like every possible reference, every metaphor, so many stories just stem from there, and you're just
But
missing
not
it.
just the Bible, though. I mean, I really would say the King James because of the language. You know, because I have a couple of these translations, these other ones, and you know, for some of the tougher passages, like I was saying, it's helpful because otherwise you kind of get lost in the ye old English. But the language is like many of the famous passages don't read the same way and actually aren't recognizable because they're more accurate. because, and this is what gets down to it, say what you will about literalism or this belief in the King James, but the Bible has changed, not just because the church elders have decided which books are in and out, and the Catholics and Protestants, the Apocrypha, and like actually all the weird Gospels that are not admitted. But more than that, just the basic text of the Bible has been changed because they keep finding scrolls, and older scrolls than the ones that Erasmus had when the King James Bible was put together.
Yeah.
So
Well,
there's now
here's a dirty little secret about Catholicism. The canon has been set but not closed. So all that the Council of Nicaea said was these books are canonical. They're inspired. But they didn't close it. So you could add more. And in fact, like the Eastern Orthodox churches have more books. And even the Ethiopian Orthodox, I think, has more than all of us. They have like 4 books of Maccabees. The Catholics have 2.
Right. And the Catholic Bible, this is a thing I learned when I converted, also just has more books than the KJV.
I have my copy
it was
of the
Luther
KJV
that took some books out, although that's a controversial way of putting it. But
no, they call that the Protestants call that the Apocrypha, but like the Apocrypha, I have a version of the King James that has the Apocrypha in it, which is weird. So I don't know when that happened.
Yeah.
When King James had the Apocryphal
books. I wonder who
books.
translated that.
I think it's part of the same thing. I think it's part of the same thing. They just label it Apocrypha to demean you guys. There's.
No, but wait, Damir, this is supposed to be the Christmas episode, and we're talking about the Bible, but the Christmas is not about the Bible.
Okay,
it's about the flesh.
Christmas.
It's about one special baby.
It's about. Did you know that there was this Puerto Rican priest that I knew, and he said in a homily, he was like, you have to imagine God as a little, like a embryo in the first few days, it's just like a little blob of blood.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, God is a little blob of blood in the womb of a Middle Eastern woman. That's what God is on Christmas. Well, before Christmas.
So I was on Advent, yeah.
So
I was just reading.
Are you sufficiently scandalized by that?
Who, me?
Yeah.
No, I mean, there's a lot of blood in the Bible. I'm just reading. I mean, I was just saying, reading in Leviticus. So I think I was just in the chapter where he says, "Don't eat blood because the blood." He's like, I am blood. Life is blood. Don't fuck with me. I am the Lord. I think that's one of the lines. Don't fuck with me. I am the Lord. I think that's Leviticus 17.
I think that's from the Message, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Damir, I mean, let's get into the Bible. What are your favorite bits so far? What do you want to explore with the crowd?
I don't know. I mean,
nothing.
I don't know. I guess I'm just like experiencing it differently than you guys are. So that's why I'm relying on you to like ask the kind of questions.
To be completely honest, I barely read the Bible growing up. I read the important bits and I heard them in church. And now I'm reading it all the way through with my wife because she's Protestant and she read it like 8 times through when she was a kid.
Yeah, what's funny, my Bible experience, again, my parents are very serious Christians, and we would like drive to church, and sometimes drive to this Nigerian church. It was like 2 hours away from where he lived, and I loved reading as a kid, and I read like a lot, perhaps too much, and they were like, you can't bring books in the car. It's Sunday. You can read the Bible. So I just read the Bible back to front, like in the backseat of the car driving to and from church, and it's such an interesting, like reading the Bible when you're 8. It's like, ooh, Song of Solomon. Like, I don't know about all these like leaping like does. I don't really know what that means, but it's kind of spicy. Like Revelation, super exciting. Leviticus,
Revelation's wild. But wild nuts. Stuff. No, but so that's the other part that's interesting to me is I think Santi, I never thought about it, but I'm also coming to the conclusion that most people haven't read the Bible, including believers, that you're that Sunday school is excerpts and then like a bunch of funny looking, funny dressed, funny looking dudes telling you how it is and giving you the bigger story and sort of doing the interpretation for you, but not actually reading it. And that's the other sort of wild thing that's sort of dawning on me as I read this, that like probably most Christians don't read the Bible.
And if you read the Bible, there's some intense stuff going on there. Like
Indeed.
The stories that are not Sunday school appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I
And
mean,
you
so
read the New Testament, and now you're dipping in,
now I'm
now you're
back in the
reading the
old.
Old.
Yeah, but
Okay.
you're this is avoidant behavior by Damir, because you're sort of saying, "Oh, I read the Bible, and I'm pretty sure that these other people aren't sufficiently shocked by it because they're letting
That's not what I
institutions
said.
interpret for." What are
That's
you
not what I
shocked
said.
by, Damir? What are
No,
you
that's not
shocked
what I
by?
said. That's not
That is sort of
what I
what
said
you
at all.
said, though, Damir.
No, I mean, I
Because
think
you're like,
it's
"Oh, well, if people
no.
only
How
knew
about
what's
this?
in this
No,
book, including
that's not what I
Christians that are
said.
actually
No,
believing."
no, that's not what I said.
What are you shocked by?
I said the following. I said is that like I've had like I think a pretty persistent and unacknowledged sense of inferiority for not having read this text. Now I'm realizing that like actually not many people have read this text. That's all I
Everyone's
was saying.
biblically illiterate.
Having a sense of inferiority when you work in our business is already a bad idea. So,
No, I mean it's a good idea.
We need more people who have that feeling. But
Yeah,
okay,
no.
so what have you been most surprised by or scandalized by
I
in
don't know,
Santi's terms?
scandalized. Well, I thought the parts in Romans that actually really captivated Luther and then Calvin, the stuff about predestination, I find like completely wild. And again, I find that stuff not wild in a way that's like, oh my God, like I can't even wrap my head around. Actually, it's more intuitive. And actually, I feel like I'm closer to the darkest version of Protestant lack of free will than any like happy Christian I know who actually thinks that their choices matter, that they can be good people, they can show that they're good people. I'm really into this idea of there's nothing you can do, you're screwed, and like like the fall
how do you
is
support
really,
this interpretation
really
of
bad.
the text?
How
do you support this
What do you mean?
interpretation of the text? Like, why is that what you believe?
No, I mean, you're asking me what struck me. I think it's like Romans 9 is wild.
But
it's wild. Just go read that part and let's
do you think
all I'm
that
saying,
subverts?
No, hold on. And all I'd say is that like I'm not interpreting the text or anything like that. I'm just saying that part resonated most strongly with me because I don't have like a very strong intuition about free will, quite frankly. I think that we very frequently convince ourselves that we have free will, and that it operates. And I think in a bounded way, we certainly do, but it's very bounded. And I think if you think too hard about it, I'm not sure we do. So that part of it makes some sense. Now again, it's not like we've said a number of times, this is not a text that is a single author. It's not a single text that is necessarily doesn't have contradictions, and this is only one small part of it. But this part, you're asking what jumped out at me. That jumped out at me, and hard. So
I'm actually, it's this version of the KJV that I have is a study Bible. So it has like a bunch of interpretations and like questions at the bottom, like to help you understand the text. So I'm reading this, and you're right. It is kind of alarming, right? What shall we say then? Is there unrighteousness with God? God forbid.
That one.
Yeah, that's Romans 9:14 for those who are following along.
I cited it in the Tuesday note as well. I excerpted a big passage of it.
So in this study Bible, there's the question related, like noted at that section, who hath resisted his will? Does all this lead to fatalism? Paul does not answer this question directly, for it is absurd and raised by one who is ignorant of the righteous character of the infinite God and the finite character of man. Paul is rather dealing with the heart attitude that would produce such a question and reminds men of his limited understanding of the unlimited and sovereign God. So essentially, the conclusion there is just like how, like, you don't even have the status to be asking that question.
That's exactly right, and I actually appreciate that. That kind of stuff. But again, it's a kind of humility. But you still can walk away from that humility and say that there's nothing you can do to feel good about yourself. Basically, that it all comes down to an unknowable plan. That insofar as, but even more interestingly, I think that does come out of that is that if you really do take God seriously, that even the concept of the good, it may be beyond your comprehension because
doesn't
the plan
is
different.
Reveal itself as it develops?
Maybe. I'm not sure, but I'm not sure you have insight into it. And especially in that passage, the whole idea is is there's a thing like, there's certain vessels he might create just for the purpose of destroying them. That there's a line in there, and it helps with the whole question of theodicy too. And but if you take that question of theodicy and like run it through that passage, it's really nasty because
It's very
that's
uncomfortable.
So why do you think people that read this book though in America, when they saw that, they didn't think of that America would be one of those vessels that he creates to destroy? They thought it would be the shining city on a hill. When's that confidence?
Well, so I asked one of our friends. I won't cite him, go unnamed, and it's not one of the crowd. It's one of our friends, so you all know him. And I was sort of over dinner musing about predestination and all these sorts of things, and he just sort of shrugged and laughed and said, well, there's justification for all sorts of things in the Bible. So you just like pick and choose the one that resonates more and you run with that. So sure, yeah, the city on the hill, that's probably in all the Gospels, but definitely in Matthew, right? That's where the metaphor comes in. I think it's Matthew 6, maybe 6 or 7. Yeah, it's 6. Something about, you won't hide your candle in the bushel.
Under bushel.
Yeah. See, I know my scripture pretty well. I can recite chapter and verse.
Well, no, I'm just saying like that? It's interesting how because the people that at least in Massachusetts, right, they're presumably, they were Protestant. I'm not sure where the Puritans stood on predestination, but presumably they believe that they were doing the will of God by creating this new colony. But they chose to see themselves as the positive work of God, not the ironic to be destroyed work of God.
But okay, so that, I think this is where like Max Weber's approach to this, or at least his explanation of Protestantism, makes sense, is that, you don't have to, lack of free will doesn't mean you just lie down and not move. It's just that you shouldn't feel good necessarily that your emotion is your own. Or that like, you are, the path that you happen to move yourself is of your own choosing. You're just doing stuff. And with that lack of, lurking in that realization that however you move through the world, that, you don't have full choice of which path you're taking, and you're not being judged on that because you poor, mortal, you have no idea. You have no idea what the big picture is. So, you do the best you can, and you hope that, like, as you say, as things are revealed, that you're on the right path. But hey, you might be going on the right path, and you're doing well for yourself. And as the American prods who believe that wealth is a sign of chosenness and all sorts of things, and then all of a sudden a tree falls on you, and you're dead.
But let me ask you this as a follow-up also to your article, but also because I know that you're interested in how states emerge, right? Is the Christianity that you encountered when you read King James New Testament, you think it's helpful for building a state and an empire, or not?
How do you mean? Oh, you think like is the teaching of Jesus like anti-state?
Yeah, because I had a friend when I was in college when I was an intern at a neocon think tank, and he said, he's like, today, it was during the Bush era, so I support the evangelicals and the Catholics in the Republican coalition because they help make us strong. But if I was a Roman around the time of Jesus, I would have opposed Christianity and persecuted it because they subverted the Roman Empire.
Wow, is your friend Nietzsche? Like,
so
Christianity makes people weak and subversive? Okay.
It does. And so what do you think about that, Damir?
I mean, I think it's true that like that it can be subversive. I don't think the one thing though that I don't think is true though is that it's infinitely subversive. I think you can build all sorts of things on top of Christianity, and we've seen it. We've seen empires built on Christianity after the Roman Empire was destroyed. And quite frankly, the church that you guys are so venerating is a big part of the fact that universal empire could be built. The other thing that strikes me in reading the New Testament is how all the metaphors are kingly. God is a sovereign. And again, it's not a democracy. And even in Revelation, you're not ascending to be an equal with God. You're not like being. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how you interpret that stuff.
You will be sent away.
Yeah, but God is also
to Sheol.
God is also a father, so it's not just a king.
Yeah, well, so the king's your father too, quite frankly. And so that's not that's not a get out of jail free card. It's in fact most monarchs, you have the same sort of thing, and it is based because most earthly monarchies in our Western tradition are you have the divine right of kings, and it slots perfectly into the metaphors of the New Testament. So this idea
let's put it this way, though, Damir, it's true that
I would just put to you that I think that a lot of these touchy-feely versions of God that you guys are now subscribing to are actually probably more modern innovations. And in fact, a lot of the metaphors for medieval Christianity, where democracy as an idea hadn't really crossed anyone's mind apart from reading some bullshit in Aristotle and Plato and being like, I don't think it's as puzzling. And that this idea that God's not your buddy. He's your master.
No, he's really not. I mean, I guess you're getting into the Old Testament now, Damir, but this is also actually one of the things that disturbs me the most as a kid when I was like reading the Bible in the back seat of the car. And I think is honestly still is for everybody who takes the Bible seriously or takes faith seriously, like a core question that's unanswerable. Like, yeah, there's the God who is Jesus, who is like feeding the poor and helping the blind see. And then there is the God of the Old Testament, who is also God, who is like, Pharaoh, I'm going to kill your son. And then I'm going to kill everybody's son. And then you're going to be like, wait, please stop. And then I'm going to drown your whole army.
And that's Romans 9.
That's the same.
That's in Romans 9. He cites Pharaoh and says, Pharaoh was created to prove a point. To
right.
As a demonstration, for demonstration purposes. That's what's in that passage. Is create an entire thing and you're damned for no good reason. Because I wanted to make a point. I wanted to demonstrate something, to reveal something. But even the revelation itself is, you'd be mistaken to think that you can make any sense of it, I would say.
Right. There's a God who's kind, and there's the God who sends 3 bears out of the woods to tear up children who are making fun of his friends. That God's kind of funny,
he was liberating the enslaved people of Israel, right? He wasn't just
sure, but I mean, you have to admit,
wreaking havoc.
Well, I mean, but then you think of Jacob and Esau, the brothers, and or not. Who am I thinking of? The one who stones the other.
There's an arbitrariness that one associates with tyranny.
Yes,
sometimes,
absolutely. But I mean, I do think that the one area that one has to keep in mind, and as you sort of alluded to in your piece, in that weird study section that I read alluded to, is simply just a finite nature of our own understanding and presumably infinite nature of God. And also, the idea of free will suggests that there is some, I don't know, and maybe this is a comforting interpretation as a human person. There is a plan, there is some ultimate thing that God is doing, but there's still a choice within to play various roles. One brother didn't have to kill the other. The Pharaoh probably could have chilled out a little bit earlier in the story there. And there was a choice made.
But you see, the Pharaoh thing, just because I read it just earlier this week,
he keeps hardening
because of Exodus.
That's the point that
he hardens his heart. He's just and I will harden his heart. And Pharaoh's several times, he's maybe I'll let these fuckers go. There's a lot of trouble. And then his heart just hardens, and he keeps them around until the next plague comes and fucks over the Egyptians, right?
So you're saying sort of we are soft liberals and we sort of retcon Jesus to make him nicer.
You
but
want
really,
Dad to be our soft daddy instead of our mad
there's
king.
There's a king, there's power, there's a sort of Hobbesian reality of the whole.
Look,
but I'll put you this.
Let me just say this:
if you were a dictator of if you were Tito in Yugoslavia, would you prefer that the copies of the gospel be not floating around? Because I wouldn't, because it's full of subversive ideas that anyone could just read a little bit closely and say, wait a second, this inspires me. Jesus walks around, he ignores the borders, he's just walking all the time. He's breaking all these religious rules.
Giving people food, he's crossing social class lines.
He tells people not to bury their parents, which is a huge thing. He's don't let them bury themselves. He tells people to hate their mother and father. He kicks moneylenders out of the temple. He
Yeah,
yells
well,
at the religious authorities. So, like, yeah, it's true that Charlemagne, or whoever created, had empires rested on this. But also, the subversion of empires is also always pregnant within the text.
look, I
If
would
you're
say,
a
I
good
would
dictator,
certainly
you
say,
don't want that to be floating around your people.
I mean, I would say that if you're as a dictator, usually there's a lot of corruption going on. So I mean, it's a very anti-corruption text for sure. And what was going on in that sort of period of Judaism, from we can tell from those texts, is that there was a lot of hypocrisy, a lot of rot, like very obvious rot in the institutions. So the the most secular read of what happened. Again, maybe it's in the Masonic Bible if they take all the miracles out, but it's a guy going around teaching, being simplifying the law, the rabbinic law, into like a very simple precept of kindness, love for neighbor, and then going around and being like, look at all these fucking hypocrites, and look at what they're doing. Even there's a more complicated law and they're flaunting it, and power is all of it. And there's a simple story in there, is that these guys collude with the Romans, who are their imperial masters, and say, this guy's trouble, kill him. And they kill him. And, and then you can, all the stuff, that the supernatural stuff is there as well. But one can just like read this as a very political story as well. And it's a political story about hypocrisy of politics confronted by a very effective reformer who basically
I don't think he's
undermines.
an effective reformer.
Well, effective enough to be killed is what I'm saying. A threatening reformer.
Threatening reformer, yeah.
Okay, but effective in that way, effective enough to have built up a mass of followers that started threatening the status quo powers, who are the Jews of the time, under the Romans, their entire society.
There's also a very clear question brought up in that story and in that moment of like where actually ultimate power should lie. Does it lie with the Pharisees and like various Roman officials, or does it actually like lay with God, who is unknowable and is like neither accountable to these guys nor like really cares about them that much, and is kind of annoyed that they're usurping his place?
Totally agree, and I think that's not that's the clear message of Scripture. But Santi's asking me, whether there's something inherently subversive in the Bible historically.
Well, I mean, that is subversive too, in such that like if you were a dictator, like this is also a reminder that actually you don't mean anything.
No, but the only thing I'd say is that it turns out it proved to be not that hard to subvert even that teaching and to justify an entire earthly empire on it. All you do is you say that king over there is picked by God. And
no,
and then,
the divine right of kings was a later development in European history.
Okay,
that's
but
not
I'm
true
saying,
that we like worship kings in the Middle Ages.
No. I'm sorry, but I'm saying it happened, and by the time that divine rights of kings happened, it was tied to Scripture. In fact, all of it ends up being justified through it. I'm not saying that like, so maybe now in the wisdom of hindsight, you can say that this was a moral abomination that this innovation happened. But as a question you're putting, is there something in Scripture that makes it toxic to empire? I would say absolutely not.
Well, but there's also, I mean, like one thing that you will notice as you read through, I mean, the New Testament, right, is basically the same story told through a lot of different voices. So there's that. The Old Testament is just like a series of like different stories from different places over a long span of time. And one of the things that you see basically repeated over and over again in the Old Testament and then reflected in the New Testament, and I think this maybe also relates to your question, both of your questions about why the U.S. interprets the Bible this way versus that way, why we're always the positive image and not the negative image, is like there's consistently a story of some tribe, country, king being like, oh, I'm chosen. No, I'm great. I'm really good. And then God being like, false, and getting rid of them and replacing them with someone new. And I think it is an interesting core question for all of us in this Advent and Christmas season. It's why we continue to think in the United States that we are not the country that's being like, oh, actually, we're great. We're the Pharisees. Like and God is going to show up and be like, you're not actually.
Let me
Maybe
just.
that hasn't happened yet. Maybe it's happening right now.
I just want to also defend on one thing that Santi slandered me in passing. Said that like I'm accusing you guys of being disgusting liberals and lovey-dovey, when in fact that like I have the truth of this. I'm making no such claims because again I'm just like riffing here. You're asking me on like sort of impressions on left and right. I'll say another thing that's interesting to me in New Testament, since we're talking about that. And as you said, it's basically the accounts of some apostles, some people that were there, or like adjacent to it in the early church. The other part is that once you get past the Gospels and Acts, and then you're just in Paul's head and in all his letters, is to me very surprising that he is an innovator. Paul is an innovator, and the big innovation is that these teachings apply to everyone. And, one can then say that, oh, well, that's an innovation of Christianity. I would say that's an innovation of Paul, because, this idea that you can find it, I think, in the Gospels, but it's not like the main thrust of the Gospels. Jesus is reforming real existing Judaism at that point. It's Paul that says, no, this applies to everyone. And so, insofar as you say, the teachings of Jesus, no, I guess I should probably read the Gospels again a little more carefully with an eye to that. And maybe you can find some passages that say that make claims to universalism. But I was struck by that as well, that the real innovation to universal values doesn't come from Jesus himself, but really comes from Paul.
Well, so I think you're referencing classic Pauline hits like neither
another
slave nor free. The classic hits from Paul, which you can read over by yourself.
Neither slave nor free, male nor female.
Yeah.
But remember again, just the history of it though, right? Again, is that the early apostles, and there's some evidence for it, right? Is that they sent Paul abroad, so he's ministering to the Gentiles.
Yeah.
Largely because Paul was a lunatic early on and was actually, beating up, killing, and haranguing the early church.
Yeah.
Finally, he has this vision on his way to Damascus. Saul becomes Paul, and then he goes back, and it's revealed at some point like he was gone for like 15 years or something. Comes back to Jerusalem, and he's talking to them. They're like, "Oh yeah, clearly you've seen some stuff too. Okay, get out of here. Get the fuck out of our hair. Do not stay in Jerusalem. Go out and teach the Gentiles."
Shake the dust off your feet.
And so Paul goes out there, and he's very successful, though the letters show an uneven level of success, but he's very successful in converting a bunch of non-Jews to this teaching, which is a teaching by a Jew, reform-minded, miraculous, but nevertheless a Jewish guy. And Paul makes this innovation, says this applies to everyone. And it's not necessarily clear until Paul does that it does, is what I'm saying.
Well,
so
Jesus does talk to the woman from Canaan.
Jesus
he does talk to the Roman centurion.
Jesus hangs out with everybody. The thing with Jesus is he didn't have that much time. He was only around and operating for a pretty short period of time. And like the thing about Jesus, at least in these tales, is that like he very much loves to lead by example, not by saying stuff, but just doing stuff. Like he goes and touches sick people. He hangs out with prostitutes by the well. He like writes in the dust on the ground, and then everyone's like, "What did you write?" And he doesn't tell them. He's sort of very mysterious in that way. And what we're seeing with Paul is that he's trying to concretize those things that he has seen Jesus do and like write letters about them. Like Jesus wasn't really writing any letters to anyone. Paul didn't
see Jesus though, of course, right?
Yeah.
Paul gets stuff from on high. He gets visions.
Yeah, but I mean, Jesus was not Jesus was the living embodiment of the things that Paul is now trying to describe.
Sure.
And that's also just a side note. This was a thing that really tripped me up my first couple of times in the New Testament. the Paul v. Saul transition and how everyone has the same name, but it's like 4 different guys all with the same name. Did this get you too? Like all of the
totally.
apostles actually are named the same thing,
No,
basically.
that's really troubling, and I had to actually like
It's
constantly be
troubling.
going. I really had to be going to the internet to save me on that one, because like it's, and if in an era before internet, like trying to like do this, I
Right.
don't
And
know,
like
I don't know how
maybe
you
they're
would.
brothers, but maybe they're cousins, but maybe they're just friends who call each other brother. And then there's a
Yeah,
sister who's like not their sister, but she's just like a girl who hangs out with them. Like there's a lot
yeah,
going on there.
yeah.
But this is really interesting. It's really interesting hearing your read of this. I think we have to do a redo when you're further into the Old Testament, because I know you will have thoughts and feelings there if you don't already.
But so I guess Santi, for those that are not watching this, is wearing a pagan hat on his head, a Santa Claus hat, and I don't know. So talk to me about Christmas then. Like, talk to me about religious Christmas, because my Christmas has always been pagan. We're gonna go get the tree tomorrow, and then on Christmas Eve we're gonna be putting a bunch of ornaments on it. The closest thing to anything religious is that there's midnight mass that my dad every time's like, oh, we're gonna go to midnight mass, and I've never gone to midnight mass. Like literally my whole life, it's just been sort of a thing that we say. It's like, oh, it's so beautiful right now, we've eaten well, and it's Christmas Eve, presents, etc. Now we're gonna go to midnight mass, and we've never gone.
Well, as you know from the New Testament, much of the beauty is in the intent and the attempt, not actually the success of doing any of these things. But I mean, actually, the story of Saint Nicholas is a pretty subversive story in and of itself. So,
what happened to Saint Nicholas? I don't know anything about that.
Is that
Saint Nicholas?
Where is it?
It is not in the Bible, I don't think. I mean, this is just like a Catholic tradition. He was a priest who was supposed to be just being a priest, and there were these women in his congregation. Like this man in his congregation had 3 daughters who needed to get married, or else they would, if I'm remembering this correctly, like maybe have to be prostitutes. Like they wouldn't be able to leave their homes, whatever. He was a priest. He was not supposed to be like engaging in various congregational problems. He was under a lot of surveillance. And so he just dropped off gifts at the father's home secretly, so that he could build up dowries for his 3 daughters and take care of them. So ostensibly, this is actually where the tradition of giving like secret presents on Christmas comes from this priest who wanted to serve his community and like preserve the virtue of these women by allowing them to marry reasonably instead of being sold off to the highest bidder by their dad.
Interesting. I don't know, Santi. What's a good, I don't know.
What's a Christmas story, Santi?
Or like what's a Christmas tradition
French...
that's not pagan? Like what do you think of on Christmas? Do you read the nativity parts of the Gospels? Do you, I don't know, like do you reflect on that kind of iconography stuff at all? I don't know.
In Paraguay, we would do fireworks because it's the summer, and we would dance and drink all night.
That sounds pretty pagan, frankly.
Why should we care about an obscure contingent event in the, southeast corner of the Roman Empire? That's what Christmas is about, is a scandal of particularity. Like this one little event transformed the world, and you try to understand that event and what actually happened there. Just contemplate that. There was a French philosopher named Maurice Blondel who wrote a book like on action and religion, and he was inspired when his friend said, "I have a lot of things to learn. Why should I be concerning my mind with a contingent event from 1900 years ago in Palestine?"
But I mean,
so why?
But A, why? But also B, the real event is Easter. Why are
they're both real events?
No. But the one that like imbues
first
meaning
act,
in all of this is Easter.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is God becoming flesh, so the Word becoming flesh. So it's a concept becoming meat, right? It's scandal to the Platonists, scandal to the Roman philosophers.
Yeah,
it's something that
Keeps
you
him off his
you
pod.
mix a concept with a concrete existence. You mix the eternal with time. Aren't you
You're not
blown
excited
away?
by that at all?
Is that how you
So
spend your Christmas? Pondering that?
more or less.
Oh, all right, good. Well, I got something to do
I
then.
spent, in fact, I
Yeah.
spend now my Christmas hanging out with my nieces and nephews who are also close to being babies.
Jesus'
So
age.
being the concrete love of your kin, is
I mean,
close to-
there's Advent. Okay, all right.
I'm
So what? Advent
not good
precedes
at this.
Easter, or Advent precedes Christmas, and I actually enjoy Advent perhaps even a little bit more than the 12 days of Christmas, because Advent is a season of expectation, right? It's a season of waiting. Like I do, in fact, spend like time in Advent thinking about that. I mean, the whole point of it is that like we live in hope. We live in expectation. Like we know that we don't know exactly who God is or how he will appear to us or what his deal is. Like kind of, this confusion that you were expressing over Paul, where it's like he just sort of makes arbitrary decisions that we can't understand, including showing up as a baby in this like weird time and place and corner of the universe. And yet it is tied to so many different and beautiful sort of like events in the human experience. And there's something really stretching about that stretches across space and time in our own understanding. And that's pretty rare in our experience to stop and think about that. Also, I love hot chocolate. So that's
let,
what I do.
let me ask you then this question. Um, do you find it seamless between these sorts of more ruminative, properly Christian thoughts and the paganism of just basically the winter festival, which is everywhere and shows up, manifests in many different ways across many different cultures? Do you find that I feel like some more fundamentalist Christians actually don't like a lot of this sort of paganism stuff and say
Well, in
that it
fact,
distracts
Christmas
from it.
wasn't celebrated in Massachusetts during the colonial era.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. And
Um,
so I mean, like,
Jehovah's Witnesses still don't. Yeah.
does that ever like cross your mind during Christmas, or it's like pretty seamless at this point? It's all been hallmarkized, and
Well, no, the thing is, like, there's supposed to be like structures of cultural practice that accommodate both the partying and the contemplation.
yeah.
So just like in the Middle Ages, there was even bigger structures like Carnival, where
right.
social hierarchies were flipped for like a particular period of time, but there was also the moments of Kairos where there were moments exclusively devoted to the divine, and there was the normal moments when you're just working. So I feel like part of the Christmas traditions is that there's a moment for feasting, and there's a moment for praying, and there's a moment for dancing, and we don't. Oh, and I think the hallmarkization has, in fact, maybe destroyed that. It's turned Christmas into an exchange, but ideally, that is what it's like. And it also, since it's not just yourself creating a relationship with God, but it's you're walking into an institution that's already there. If your personality is more shy and contemplative, there's a corner for you. If your personality is more ecstatic and you don't like to think and sit and think too much, there's also a place for you to accommodate within that range.
And I mean, I think the one last thing about that too is that Christmas, the holiday, the moment, the thing that it represents is pretty profoundly human, and so also kind of clamorous. So in some sense, like people being nuts at the mall is as much a part of the human experience as people being contemplative in the church. Like if Jesus as existed turned up in a barn, like surrounded by lowing cows, and there's like this guy there, like playing random music that nobody really invited. Like, there's all sorts of stuff going on in the Christmas story. It is not as solemn as one might feel like one has to believe. Like the richness of the human experience is kind of part of it. But I think nothing about faith is seamless for the majority of people, if we're being honest. Like there is always like some sort of like, you're always wondering like, how does this thing I'm experiencing in the world as a human jive with this like higher expectation or this other thing that's going on? Like, how do I fit all of these parts of my life together? And like, that's also just like the experience of faith.
Right. Yeah, you sit with the tension. Maybe that's one. Like, you sit with the tension of, God becoming flesh, history and eternity meeting. Your life is going, but it's also pausing in this moment in the middle of the winter or the summer. It's
So
it's
here's
a point of attention.
Here's a dumb question,
baby.
Santi. This is maybe how we end this on a particularly dumb question. Do you call it summer when it's actually winter down south of the equator? I've always wondered about that. I've always wondered about that. Yeah, the Australians, you call it summer?
So you think Christmas is in the summer?
Yeah, Christmas is in the summer.
Bullshit.
Wait, in Australia they call it the winter?
I don't know. I'm asking.
I don't know.
No, they don't.
This is
one of
those
backwards too.
This is one of these
summer.
things
and like
that
the Christmas carols in Paraguay, like at least one of them that I remember, like refers to summer things in it, like plants that come out in the summer.
That's all fine. But that's what I'm saying. All that is fine. I'm wondering whether I would, if I was running Paraguay or Australia, I'd keep calling it winter and just associate winter with flowers and budding things. You know what I mean?
Well,
that would make sense to me. Because
this is the mystery.
Probably some Latin American dictator has done that. So, and you know how Chavez like shifted the time zones like 15 minutes too, just because he wanted.
Yeah.
You can do things like that. Yeah.
Well,
it's a more dynamic society than America, you know.
And Trump might save us from daylight savings time. That's the other great
thing.
Yeah. Wow.
That's true. Speaking of the eternal and the temporal.
Yeah. On
that
note,
shift time, Trump.
On that time, dear friends, Merry Christmas to you all.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
And see you all soon.